Good morning from Zürich. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Tyler Brûlé. Coming up on today's program, Florian Egli is back. Also, Samuel Schumacher is also here from the Blick. Great to see you from Bavaria. How are things?
Things are great in Bavaria and even nicer here. So I'm here for a beautiful weekend.
Excellent. Do you have some stories for us as well? You have to sing for your supper, your lunch, your breakfast in this case. What's caught your eye this morning?
I have several stories. One that's caught my eye is what's happening in Georgia, how civil society basically prepares for this probably upcoming pro-Russian law. Then we have a story on Switzerland, quite funny, and maybe one on Microsoft if you get to it.
Very good. Also, we're going to be talking to our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, in London. We'll also be heading to the Croisette in Cannes to talk to Krizanovich, and we'll be heading to Sydney as well to get the latest on what's happening in New Caledonia. It's the 19th of May, 2024, live from Zurich. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from Zurich, this is Monocle on Sunday with Tyler Brûlé.
Good morning from a somewhat sunny Zurich. Florian Egli is here back. You used to be at Forhaus. You're now in Munich. Doing what?
Moved to Germany, which came with some friction. I have to say, I have to get used to German administration. I have so many administrative stories that I'm not going to bother you with. But they're quite fun.
More complex than Swiss administrative story?
Way more complex. Way more complex. Complex to the point where you always have to send a letter, which is not valid unless it's stamped. So I have a stamp now.
Right. And do you have a fax machine as well? Because also fax machines are also important for administration.
They are, because administrations rely on fax and stamps, right?
But is there one sort of ministry or one part of the Gemeinde municipality which is more complex than the other?
The municipality of Munich was quite nice, actually. I can totally approve how they work, so that's totally fine. As soon as you go towards Bavarian ministries, it gets more complicated. And unfortunately, I'm working at the university, so the Technical University of Munich. So I am now a civil servant of Bavaria, technically, which means I have to, deal with Bavarian administration, which is horrible.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to say also Samuel Schumacher is here as well from the Blick. I don't know if there's been a title change as well. Are you sort of still chief international correspondent, or is there even a more grand title these days?
No, actually, that's the title. I'm the only international correspondent, so basically that makes me the chief of all of them.
That's
right.
And where have you been out of the world lately?
I'm just back from Tunisia, where I spent a couple of days talking to human smugglers and traffickers just ahead of the start of the new migration season. The Mediterranean Sea is warming up. Migration boats are filling up. There's more and more people drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. So we went down there to Tunisia, which is the sort of hub now. About 2/3 of all of the African migrants who leave the continent are traveling through Tunisia. We went there to talk to, all sorts of people.
And from the perspective of landlocked Switzerland, what is Switzerland's interest and role in all of this?
It was interesting when I was talking to Tunisians, to locals, they're young men mainly. I was asking them, where do you want to go? And they actually told me, well, Switzerland is on top of our list because you have such great prisons. And I was asking, what do you mean? What's the thing? And they said, well, there's no real legal way for us to make money there. So if we make it to Switzerland, and many of our friends are already there, we'll have to start dealing, we'll have to start stealing, and that's...
So that's clear. That is really part of the agenda. It's not that they're coming to get a job working in ground maintenance at the airport or something like that.
Well, I think many of them will try, but there's no chance for them. I think they realize that it's going to be really tough, so that's the option they have.
So what is and of course I think everyone can sort of tune into or jump into the pages of Blick to get more on the story. But the journey, obviously, across to Italy, up by train, hitchhiking, whatever it may be, you get to Ticino. Then what happens?
That's a good question. I've never been down at the border with Italy, actually. So what
so this is the continuation of the story.
It is a continuation. I should go down to Ticino right now. I hear it's sunnier than in Zurich right now. So
it's going to get beautiful today.
But I think the thing is that they will have to come into the country illegally. There's no way for them to come in legally. Once they are in Italy, they will be registered there, and that's the final destination of them.
And so final destination, and I'm looking over at Florian right now as well, but also, of course, we know, whenever you drive or take the train, of course, to Germany as well, there are occasionally border checks. Sometimes you get sort of 10 kilometers past the border if you're driving in, and then there's sort of a spot check as well. But also the relationship there as well. I mean, do you also sort of notice this as a narrative if you're looking at the pages of the Süddeutsche right now, especially when we talk about the Maghreb?
Yeah, I think it's a big narrative in German politics at the moment, right? But maybe a bit like if you go a bit further back, then Germany was actually a country that had reasonably little immigration for a very long time, and then it changed quite a bit in recent years, and that's now obviously being played politically quite heavily, also to the point where actually Germany imposed unilateral border checks on countries like Switzerland, but also on other Schengen countries, kind of around the border, which kind of unanimously, are found to be extremely ineffective, because these one or two buses or trains that you're going to stop and you're going to, symbolically catch 4 people that try to make it over to southern Germany. I mean, that's not changing anything, but there is an extremely strong unwillingness politically to change anything fundamental. I mean, the real problem here, the Maghreb is not going to go away. The real problem is that we're not able to offer anything to these people, neither in Tunisia nor as like an employment pathway or opportunity in Western Europe, and fundamentally that needs to change, I think, and there is a total unwillingness to even talk about it.
And is that part of the discussion as well? Of course, this has very much been a story that's been in the Swiss press about, of course, the bilateral relationship, deporting and sending criminals back, of course, to Tunisia, but also aid packages as well to, of course, make sure that there are jobs in the country.
Switzerland has sent about 100 million Swiss francs. That makes it 100 million, euros down to Tunisia over the past 4 years to help them with political stuff, but also with economic, opportunities. But our Minister of Asylum, his name's Beat Jans, he will travel down to Tunisia this week, actually, I think on Monday, maybe on Tuesday, to talk.
It's a holiday here tomorrow, so he may not want to fly tomorrow.
Probably he'll travel down on Tuesday, right? And he'll talk to, the Tunisian government about whatever. We don't know that yet, but I think that it seems to be a hot topic right now. It seems to be something that the Swiss are actively working on, how to deal with these sort of challenges and how to change that.
One thing that's interesting, I just had a conversation this week with a just retired manager of a German car maker, very high up.
Are they Bavarian-based, maybe?
They are Bavarian-based, yes. No more than that, and in terms of information. But so he was saying that, how second-hand cars, they end up in the Maghreb, a lot of them. And then he had this narrative of, but why don't we have recycling and repair shops there? And then, people will stay there. And it's also like, it struck me as such a naive kind of play, because that as most of these places develop a little bit, actually migration increases because the opportunities to, go away, actually go up. So there's this debate is just, very far away from being facts-based, I think.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, is secondhand cars sort of a term for something else as well? But anyway, we can unpack that. Let's cross over to London. Our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, is there. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Tyler.
Emma already gave us the weather report, as she does in London. Hopefully you've got a few more things for us from there this morning.
It's a little bit of Groundhog Day here because, as you know, we don't have a declared date for the election that is coming our way this year. But all the parties every weekend are making sure that they're landing stories which they think will appeal to their key constituents. And the question of immigration comes up here, of course, just about every single weekend. So the Tories are saying that they're considering, Rishi Sunak is considering limiting the number of student visas available. Some discussion on the right of the party that they should be banned altogether, international student visas, because often when people are here, they claim people then ask for the right to remain in the country permanently, claiming that it would be unsafe for them to return home. But interestingly, within his own government, obviously there's an education minister who's keen to see people come to this country to study. We fell out of the Erasmus scheme when we left the EU, so the appeal of British education is already dented quite a lot. So within his own party, he has a real problem trying to push that idea through. But immigration, again, back on the list. And the lead story in the Telegraph today is a story about how Labour plans to make doctors and nurses work evenings and weekends, keeping GPs offices open, surgeries open at the weekends, just to get more people through. So they're claiming they can do another 40,000 appointments every single week, and that they will recruit massively for the healthcare system here. It's a fascinating debate, Tyler, because as we go around Europe, different countries, we see the systems they have. And here it can be great and it can be disastrous. It's completely hit and miss how this National Health Service works. But Labour's claiming that to cope with the numbers that we have, it will have to see the fastest expansion of staff and hires that we've ever had.
And I guess that goes back to the start of the program. This becomes an immigration topic. Of course, universities can only turn out so many students. So that means, of course, that the NHS and, of course, the private sector as well has to look towards to Nigeria, to the Philippines, and elsewhere. Correct?
Yes, and you touched on a really important point, because actually Wes Streeting, who's been talking about this in the Telegraph today, he says that one of the key things is to wean ourselves off immigration for healthcare, because one, it pulls out healthcare workers from countries where already the supply of doctors and nurses is limited. And he says that what's happening in the UK is that lots of students who get straight A's at school and manage to get great degrees, they can't get into the training system to be doctors because we're training foreign doctors. We don't have the capacity. So he wants to see us get rid of the immigration element for healthcare and ramp up the number of training places for doctors and nurses here in this country. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing, Tyler, because I was reading a story yesterday that if you just look at what's happened over this last 10, 12 years, the average weight of a British person is now almost 5. And let me work it out. It's 14 pounds. So it's roughly 6 kilos heavier than they were 15, 20 years ago. That's the average man is now a full 6 kilos heavier. And the impact on that on the healthcare system is extraordinary. So it's great to reform the healthcare system here in this country. But when you have such an obesity issue in the UK, unless you tackle how people eat and the food they have and how they feel about sport and fitness and mental health, then you have no chance of ever catching up with the numbers of people going into the healthcare system.
Andrew, I feel that also you're, given the time that you spend on the Iberian Peninsula, in Mallorca in particular, that you're advocating for more padel courts in the UK.
More padel courts. But again, it's fascinating.
Florian's giving a big thumbs up.
I'm totally in.
Are you totally in?
Yeah, I'm totally sold on padel. I'm 100% sold.
It's taking Munich by storm. So you're promising us a studio, but you might swap that studio for a padel court.
Exactly. If I get a chance, I'm going to swap it, to be honest.
It's
maybe we can have it like a little corner of the padel court that can be like a pop-up studio, right?
It could be, Andrew. But it was interesting. You recommended a new Spanish TV series, and I tuned into it the other evening. A new sitcom. What's it called again?
It's called Alpha Males.
Alpha Males. But it's fascinating because whether it's in episode 1 or 2, a big part of that program takes place on a padel court, which is, and it's incredible how it has just become almost sort of you can say sort of a societal foundation in Spain suddenly.
Yeah, I guess that they've had generations of training on the beach, playing with bat and ball on the beach. So when they get the proper courts, they've got kids who already know what to do. But yeah, where we are in Mallorca, in Palma, we're opposite an old school tennis club, and tennis is also a big thing for kids, especially in Mallorca, where you have Nadal being a Mallorquin. That sport and fitness is a really fascinating thing. And again, when you come back to this healthcare thing, what I find funny is how many parents in Mallorca, they're at the end of the day, they're taking their kids to sailing class, they're going to play tennis, they're going to play all of these sports, and the weather is good. So I think more kids are outside playing, swimming, doing activities than they would be in a city like London, for example.
Andrew, I was just going to say, of course, padel is always its doubles. Now, if it was sort of, us against our guest today, we wouldn't stand a chance because, as you hear at the top of the program, Andrew, the setup here, we normally have got, of course, mics which extend, but we've had to put them on top of sort of stacks and stacks of coffee table books because Samuel's so tall. Florian's tall already. So I think on the padel court, it would be all arms and legs, and we really, you and I, we'd be finished. Samuel, what's caught your eye story-wise? There's a Swiss story. Maybe there's a Swiss story that you both want to talk about. Might have to do with the Matterhorn potentially.
Well, the Swiss story that caught my eye was the fact that the Swiss are thinking about stopping all sort of tourism promotion for Switzerland because they're afraid of the hordes of tourists who will flock once again to our lovely little country this summer. We've had a couple of low seasons tourism-wise, and there's an ad out with Roger Federer, and he's basically promoting the Matterhorn, and I think there's sort of a fear that Switzerland will be overrun not only by Tunisian migrants but also by foreign tourists this summer. And
or also Monocle readers, because Andrew, they better not do this before we have our summer market, because our summer market in London in the middle of June, or towards the end of June, is being sponsored by Switzerland. It is the Swiss summer market comes to the middle of Marylebone. We've even got black-nosed sheep coming down from Scotland, which are supposedly Swiss. Go figure that out. So hopefully they don't sort of cut the promotion. But what is the sort of where's the concern coming from, Samuel?
There's over-tourism. We've seen these stories out of Venetia, for example, down in Italy, where they're charging people now to enter the city. There's, I think, similar ideas in different other tourism hotspots worldwide. And I think the Swiss, they would probably be quite happy about being able to charge tourists to see all sorts of mountains or swim in all sorts of lakes. But I think over-tourism is the big issue. I don't think we should be too afraid, though.
I don't think so either. I mean, partly, I think a lot of people are already scared off by the prices here anyway. But yes, as you said, of course, the Swiss often think that they're at the absolute center of the world. Andrew, but this is a topic, of course, from an urbanism perspective. You're dealing with it all the time. There is this, of course, this narrative everywhere, whether it's, someone was saying it's Venice, it's Amsterdam, it's all kinds of cities saying, we don't want tourism, but it's a little bit be careful what you wish for, isn't it?
Well, it is. So, and again, I give the example of Mallorca, which I know well. So, in the year 2000, there were 10 million visitors to Mallorca. They believe that this year it will hit 20 million. So that is a huge increase. They've done lots of things to try and curtail it. They've limited the number of, in recent governments, the number of hotel rooms that could be built. They've tried to make it illegal to use Airbnb. There's heavy fines for that. They've had restrictions on the number of cruise ships that arrive, but you still have 3 a day, 5,000 people on each ship. And it's interesting, the average length of stay in Mallorca because of that is actually 1 day is the average length of stay. So huge numbers of people coming in and out. And it props up the economy and it gives people jobs and it helps lots of people. But on the other side, that it means that many people hold back on apartments in towns where you are allowed to rent them for tourism, that many people can't find jobs, that factories can't find places for their staff to work. So you have to be cautious. So I think that everybody is looking at how do you nudge up spend and stay and maybe limit the incoming numbers. But we know this is a story across Spain, across all of the world. As people have got wealthier and they can get on planes and they can travel more and the world has opened up, that we see tourism on a level that we haven't seen before. But it done well, that is the battle, to do it well, to make sure that that, as we know, Tyler, that local communities have places where they can live and that they don't feel squeezed out of the economy, and it's seen as a gain. We spoke to somebody this week when we were in Madrid, when we were talking to many people in the world of tourism, who said responsibility is the key thing, that everybody who comes as a tourist, it's like, are you putting money in the economy? Are you supporting good jobs? Rather than the numbers. So don't try and curtail it or ban it, but try and make it better, try and make it work for communities.
And Sam, it seems a bit ridiculous as well, because the Symphony of the Seas, or whatever the ship may be called, is not sort of pulling up at the base of the Matterhorn.
Not yet.
Well, you never know, right?
Climate change. Once Italy is going to be underwater, we'll have access to the sea. And
this is true. Yes, and look at and you never know what's going to happen. Even before that, how much the waters are going to rise on the Rhine. So those big ships could even sort of be hurtling down towards Basel before we know it.
Absolutely. There's one concern that I do understand, though, that I read about in the paper this morning with St. Moritz, for example, which you know well. There's a new social housing project, obviously, going on there because of the fear of locals, of residents of St. Moritz, that they're basically being pushed out by all of these foreigners who are coming in and then buying all of their houses. So I think there's some concern that I understand, but still, Switzerland has never been and will never be the center of the world, so we better cool down a bit. We're not going to be overrun this summer.
But Andrew, that's an interesting topic as well. I mean, when you think about, if we're going to sustain this, also how do you house these people as well? From an urbanism perspective, do we move to a place? Not about dorms, but we were talking about a project in Portugal where it's almost a given now that you have to build housing now if you want to have great GMs, if you want to have a good concierge, etc. And it's actually not the role of the city. It's the role of the employer now. And of course, and probably many discussions, debates, are we moving back to a world of factory towns? Is that a good or a bad thing? But do you think this is also a direction we have to move, even in London? I mean, where, of course, again, the pressure is always on the local councils to provide housing, but maybe it's also about big employers too.
I think there's definitely a role for the reimagination of the company town done well. And also it's interesting, here in the UK many years ago, if you got a job in the police, or if you worked for the fire brigade, or if you maybe were even a headmaster or a caretaker, all those jobs came with somewhere to live, that you were given, either that it was owned by the fire brigade or the police, or it was run by the council on your behalf. And I think all those positions and all those properties have been sold off and got rid of mostly. So I wonder whether we have to think about, if you want to keep jobs open for those people, and we want to make sure that our kids have people to teach them, and that we have the healthcare workers, that maybe there is a role for, when you build a hospital, you also make sure you do build nurses' accommodation as they used to in the past, and that those things are just part and parcel of getting planning permission for projects.
I mean, Florian, you're at the Technical University of Munich. Does it come with housing?
No, it doesn't, and it's also hard in Munich, right? Like, Munich has a very tight housing market. So I think these are problems that kind of every city that is attractive kind of grapples with at the moment. On the tourism thing, I think another aspect of that is that mobility is just too cheap, in my opinion. Like, for many reasons. Not least for from an environmental perspective as well. And I think part of the effect of mobility being so cheap is that we see people staying for one day. Right? And that's not like, I think if mobility were more expensive, that wouldn't necessarily be, mean that only rich people can travel, but it would mean that you have to travel differently. Like, you have to stay there longer, and I think that would already, change part of it, perhaps. So that's another aspect of housing in every, attractive city at the moment. It's a huge challenge.
And probably people are listening and scratching their head. Does anyone stand out as having sort of figured this out when you're talking to mayors and authorities around the world? Are there any bright spots? Are there any benchmarks that you think of?
Well, interesting. We're commissioning the summer paper at the moment for the Mediterranean, and one of the stories we're looking at is who's getting tourism right. And I think that we will hopefully be able to give a more confident answer to that in the coming weeks. But I would just say that you travel eastwards in Europe, and you go to countries like Romania and Bulgaria, where they're still keen to grow their tourism offering. Even in many parts of Greece, everybody goes to the same few islands. You go to the Peloponnese and you go to the mountains in the summer. It's extraordinary, and there's few people there. So a lot of the problem is not just total numbers. It's encouraging people to disperse, to visit other places. So tourism done well is not just about cutting total numbers to a nation, but making sure that people really do explore and travel. And again, in the conversations, Tyler, we've had with Spain over the years, when you think of extraordinary places like Extremadura and Asturias and many of these places which aren't on the obvious tourist map for foreigners, then those are the places that would probably say, look, actually, we'd like a bit more tourism. We have places for people to stay. Send us people who would appreciate the culture we have.
No, as I was saying, I was in Galicia early in the week, and I mean, Florian, Galicia, it's sort of the Bavaria on the Atlantic. I mean, it is they make things. There's forests. It's a remarkable place. But and we were talking about it last year. I mean, you go to Galicia in the summertime, you only hear Spanish. You don't hear any German. You don't hear any English, and it's domestic tourism. And I guess that's also a discussion as well. At the Matterhorn, is it okay if it's lots of Swiss people visiting and maybe in their hordes and even come on cruise ships? But very different, of course, if it's lots of people who are on WeChat from China.
That's true. I think the fact, what Andrew was just mentioning, I think it's interesting that if you look at the Swiss map, there's lots of really, really nice mountains and also small towns that are great to visit, that have basically no international visitors. One of the examples would be my hometown of Aarau, which is a great little city. It has a great Mediterranean, not a Mediterranean, sorry, medieval.
Andrew, did you hear that? Look, the seas are already rising. There's a fjord you don't know about, goes all the way to Aarau. Amazing.
No, there's a medieval old town, and there's no cars there. They have great raves outdoors and a great river to swim in. There's no tourism there, so come visit Aarau instead of the Matterhorn next time you're in Switzerland.
Okay, is he selling you on it, Florian?
I think he's selling it quite well. I was thinking, I was trying to go back when I was in Aarau last.
Listen, lots of trains going through there.
Lots of trains going through. There is one really nice concert location in Aarau that was, I think, the last time I went there. Yeah,
the KIF.
Yes.
Well, just mentioning maybe Chinese and cameras. There was a great story, Andrew. We were looking at it this week in the Wall Street Journal, which has been playing out a little bit in Switzerland, which of course is about Switzerland buying the F-35 fighters, and this very small little hotel beside an Air Force base that was owned by the Chinese has become this sort of big geopolitical story. Families made their way back to China. Not sure if they were sort of fully chased out by the Swiss or the Americans or the British. But one that's been part of your beat as well, or has that been more of a domestic story? But even though it's quite a large geopolitical one, which might need a chief international correspondent on it.
It might need a chief international correspondent on it. I remember back then when they were testing the F-35, I had the chance to actually go to that little airport out in the western parts of Switzerland to actually see and hear it. It was really important.
And you stayed at that hotel thinking, why is there a dim sum breakfast here? And not sort of Rösti mit Spiegelei.
There was like a humming in the background, just like in the microphone here. So it's sort of
yeah, Andrew, there's a lot of concern about we've been hacked because there is a hum on on this line. They say it's in London. I'm trying to deny that it's in Switzerland, but that's what our David Stevens said anyway. I don't know if you're unplugging cables there or not, but
there's no humming here, I'm afraid. So I can't be blamed.
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to let you get on with your lovely Sunday in London. That's our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck. Emma Nelson is in London with the news headlines for us.
Thank you very much indeed, Tyler. Israel's war cabinet minister says he'll stand down if there's no post-war plan for Gaza published within the next 3 weeks. Benny Gantz has demanded that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu set out goals, including the end of Hamas rule in Gaza. The US and Saudi Arabia are on the point of signing a draft strategic deal. Saudi media report that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan have met in Riyadh to discuss an almost finalised draft of an agreement. Hundreds of French riot police have arrived on the Pacific Ocean territory of New Caledonia after 6 people were killed in rioting. There have been violent protests over a proposed new law that will let French residents who've lived in New Caledonia for 10 years vote in provincial elections. And a row has broken out between Switzerland's federal government and the country's bondage fans. According to the Tages-Anzeiger, a recommendation by the European Council has prompted a ban in torture instruments. The new law has prompted outrage from representatives of the sadomasochistic community who fear they won't be able to get their equipment. But the Federal Council say they'll try to solve the problem by classifying such items as being for therapeutic purposes. And those are the headlines. Back to you, Tyler, in Zurich.
Okay, Emma demands the question.
Right.
Where is this particular federation based? Are they in Aarau?
Well, we did ask, but apparently they're quite tied up.
Wait, Samuel's got some late breaking news on this topic, perhaps.
I'm just saying, once they ban that stuff, if you're a fan of S&M, if you're a fan of that sort of torture instrument, you actually should come to Aarau. There's going to be...
I thought you were going to say head to Tunisia, but anyway.
There's an old tradition that dates back to the medieval times, not the Mediterranean times. It's called Maienzug, and actually what they made, or what they did back then is they sent the school children out into the woods in the summertime to get some new sort of canes, some new sort of branches to give them to the teachers so that they can be spanked once they're not, good boys or good girls. And still, on the 5th of July this year, there's a funny little festival in Aarau going on celebrating that old tradition, and all of the school children will be dressed up in white and walk through the streets of the
Samuel,
medieval
you know
old
an
town.
awful lot about this. You know more than probably I would ever imagine that you'd know. You've just jumped in with an encyclopedic knowledge of bondage instruments in Switzerland. There is
and also pagan festivals for children. And Emma, that also going back to Swiss tourism, you've been figuring out what you can do this summer with your child. So I think it's July 5th.
It's July 5th.
It must be booked out. There's probably no rooms left. Emma, you better get online and see if you can book something.
I shall do. Well, if I want to, the article in the Tages-Anzeiger does talk about a specialist hotel near Zurich which has described this proposed law as a catastrophe. So I'm sure that a little bit of local reportage could dig out some good stories. Maybe not for my son, though, if that's all right with you, if you don't mind.
I don't know why the spotlight's only on Switzerland on this one. I mean, listen, you're from Germany, I mean, the other side of the border as well, which is sort of rather famed for its
totally liberal.
And it's round the clock retail outlets, you could say, specializing in such equipment.
Sure. Yes, I just want to add a quote from that hotel manager that Emma has mentioned. So he's quite disappointed with the situation because he says 3/4 of our guests are politicians, but never would they have the idea to change the laws accordingly. You know?
There you go. Emma, I mean, going back to we didn't pull you in on the tourism discussion, but of course you spent a lot of times in and around these mountains as well. Do you have any sort of, magic remedies and just your take on sort of this over tourism narrative, a bit overhyped or not?
I'm not sure. I've got to go to Venice next week, and I'm wondering what's going to be like.
I'm going to Venice tomorrow.
Are you? Well,
yes.
Let me know what it's like.
Are you paying €5?
Am I paying €5? I don't know if it's built into the plane ticket or I'm sure somewhere in the room cost it probably will be. But anyway, it's of course it's for official business. So I'm sure I'll get stung somewhere. But Emma, go ahead. Venice, when? So
next week, and I'm looking forward. I'm not looking forward, but I'm interested to see what it's going to look like because you have finite space in Venice. I really want to see what's going on. London has become incredibly over touristified, if that's remotely possible. There's clearly some European break going on at the moment. You can't move on the tube for European families, which actually is quite nice. And I just don't know how you manage it. I really, really don't know how you manage it. I know that Mallorca is having problems as well. There was an article in, it's as Andrew mentioned a little while ago, but
in the Mallorca Zeitung.
In the Mallorca Zeitung.
Which says it all.
Mallorca Tagblatt.
But they're saying that there's going to be anti-tourism protests, and they're going to try and sort of charge the airport. I mean, clearly people are I don't know, maybe sometimes you just need to sort of remind people that actually if the tourists go, let's remember what it was like in COVID, and there wasn't any money.
Yeah, no, indeed. And of course, we've seen this in Tenerife and many other places. And we'll try to catch up with you a little bit later. We're going away for a short break right now. It's just 10:35 here in Zurich. When we head back, we're going Pacific bound. We'll be heading to Sydney to talk about New Caledonia. Stay with us.
Monocle's free to subscribe daily email newsletters, the Monocle Minute and Weekend Edition, deliver headlines and a swathe of recommendations from our editors, correspondents and bureau. You can also browse a menu of radio highlights and Monocle films. Our weekend newsletters deliver great columns from Andrew Tuck on Saturdays and Tyler Brûlé on Sundays, cultural highs, media diets and far-off newspapers, recipes to cook at home. It's a fun take on weekend living. Head to monocle.com/minute to be part of the conversation.
You're back with Monocle on Sunday with me, Tyler Brûlé. Let's get the latest now on the French riot police, of course, who have been sent to the Pacific island of New Caledonia after 6 people were killed, hundreds injured. I'm joined by Andrew Beatty. He's the Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Island news editor at Agence France-Presse. He's in Sydney. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. So, of course, this is one of the stories which, yes, you saw it in the pages of Le Figaro, you saw it in Les Echos. It was sort of bubbling up at the start of this week, or you could argue is bubbling up even a little bit further afield than that. But now we have a situation, of course, where... Yes, we've had roads blocked. We've got, nationals from countries all over the world who are stranded, and now some real, looks like real intervention. Maybe just bring us up to speed, of course, what you're getting from New Caledonia.
Yeah, so basically since Monday evening, there have been protests against the French efforts to change the voting laws in New Caledonia to allow people who've been resident for more than 10 years to vote, which Indigenous Kanaks believe will dilute their vote and is a kind of breach of a 30 or so year peace process. So we've had 6 nights basically of rioting, and the French state has tried to implement ever more kind of serious measures to tackle this. They've introduced a curfew. They've banned alcohol sales. They've banned TikTok. they declared a state of emergency. And, it hasn't really succeeded in ending, what has been quite serious looting and rioting and burning of properties. So they're sending in, all told, it will be about 2,700 military police and troops to try and take back control. At the moment, the situation is that they don't fully control the main Route 1, which is the route that links Nouméa with Nouméa International Airport, which is a kind of gateway to the rest of the world for the island, and a gateway to other towns and cities on the main island. And they don't really have full control of some neighborhoods in the capital, Nouméa. So, yeah, they're struggling. It seems to be getting a little calmer every night, but they're struggling to get the situation completely under control.
Of course, they're awaiting the arrival of all of these gendarmes, Police Nationale, to, of course, arrive. France already has a sizable garrison in New Caledonia already. So I don't know if you could sort of maybe set the scene or the background for us as to how it's so out of control, but also why even a substantial garrison cannot get a lid on things.
Yeah, it seems to have really taken them by surprise. I think the thing to kind of understand is that these groups, some of whom are armed, have actually set up roadblocks all along the main thoroughfares in certainly the Route 1 that goes to the airport, and also some parts of the capital. So I don't know if it's a tactical choice not to go in very hard and kind of get rid of these, or they just simply didn't have the manpower. But the fact that they're sending in quite so many troops, as I say, it's about 2,700 all told, would indicate that they just didn't have the numbers. Certainly our reporters on the ground today went out to the airport. They were able to get there, but they were stopped several times by, makeshift roadblocks. So evidently, as of a few hours ago, these hadn't been cleared by the gendarme or by the national police.
Just and from your perch in Sydney, and of course tourism is part of the story, not the only story though as well, because there are resources in New Caledonia. New Caledonia, Nouméa, a desirable place for Australians to go. Where is it sort of positioned on the holiday map?
Yeah, it's very, very popular with Australians and New Zealanders actually, and both those countries are kind of waiting for permission from the French to fly in aircraft, or mostly military aircraft, to go and collect some of the travelers who are stuck there. There's estimated to be about 3,200 travelers who've been stuck because of this unrest, because the airport's been closed. Now, that includes some people from New Caledonia who are stuck in places like Singapore, but the vast majority are stuck on the main island. In New Caledonia. I spoke to an Australian tourist today who was kind of very annoyed with how little information they'd been given from the Department of Foreign Affairs in Australia, and how little kind of support was offered there. They've been barricaded for 7 days or so inside a hotel, and with dwindling supplies of food. Although they're still getting food, and the situation is certainly not worse for them than it is for some of the locals who are having to queue for hours and hours to get into some of the few remaining supermarkets that are open.
You mentioned also the TikTok ban. There's a kind of a curious geopolitical component to this one, which is also France accusing Azerbaijan of course, stirring things up as well in a bit of sort of a diplomatic tit for tat. Any sort of evidence around this, and if this is still part of a simmering story?
Yeah, I didn't have this in my news bingo at the beginning of the week, I have to say, but so the French government is adamant that the Azerbaijanis have been stoking unrest on TikTok, and they've presented evidence to that effect. But I think it's just worth noting that the number of people who are using VPNs in New Caledonia has surged about 150% in the last week. So I think if people want to get on TikTok, they still will.
I mean, obviously, yeah, Azerbaijan is not top of mind when you think about countries meddling, maybe not just in the affairs of French territories, but the Pacific in general. But of course, we can think about another country which does, of course, try to influence small Pacific islands. Is China part of a story in all of this? Not in terms of TikTok, who knows, maybe they are. But is there, when we think about the backing for the Kanak indigenous community, where that's coming from? Are there other players in this, or is that, from where you're sitting? Is it just, of course, historical grievances?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I don't have any evidence that the Chinese are involved, but there is a huge Chinese element to this, or the Chinese have huge interest there. New Caledonia has quite large nickel deposits, and quite a lot of those nickel deposits go to China. But also, it just plays into this kind of this tension that there's been throughout the South Pacific of competition between China on one side, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand to a degree on the other, and just a battle for influence. So I'm sure that the Chinese will be looking to take advantage of this, and anything that can weaken the French state, anything that can increase their interests there, I'm sure they'll try and pursue. But then again, unrest. I believe that the nickel operations have been slowed or shut completely. So, their interests are not really served by all this unrest either, at least in the short term.
Indeed. Andrew Beatty, the Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Islands news editor at Agence France-Presse, joining us from Sydney. Thanks for that. Samuel, you're nodding your head, of course, again, with your very grand correspondent title. Are you thinking about how do I get that Air Calin flight to get me to, close to Niamey? The airport, as we know, is closed at the moment. But can you pitch this to the news desk, do you think, as an important geopolitical story? We talk about nickel, of course, deposits there as well. I don't think Edelweiss is flying, so there's probably there's not too many Swiss tourists probably trapped there, maybe one or two. But
probably not, no, and I don't think they will send me there to rescue them. I'd love to go, but I'm planning my next trip to an Eastern European country again. So there's no New Caledonia for me up for grabs right now.
Might that Eastern European country begin with letter U?
Yeah.
Yes. When was the last time you were out in the Ukraine?
I was there at the beginning of the year for the last time, so it's been a while. Things have changed quite a lot, quite dramatically, and they are not changing for the better. And Switzerland is about to host the Peace Summit in June, in the middle of June. It's kind of going to be a tough time to find a good hotel room in central Switzerland, because it will be booked by U.S. presidents and all of these sorts of people. But so we're trying to get some good stories out of Ukraine just before that summit's going to happen.
And I mean, with your news nose, when you've been out there for considerable stretches, and of course a number of tours of duty, you could say. What's interesting right now? I mean, of course, we know in the summer period, of course, it is in a way, easier to do land grabs, etc. We move out of course, this winter period. Is that part of it? Because, of course, a front can accelerate much more in summertime versus winter. But what are you focusing your gaze on?
I will focus on the mood that has changed. It's been a considerable change when you talk to people. I was invited all the time to weddings which will take place at the end of the war. After victory was sort of the thing that everyone would tell me, you will celebrate after victory. And now if you talk to these people who are living alongside the front in cities like Sloviansk, in cities like Kramatorsk, which has a mayor who used to study and live in Switzerland, he's an interesting guy. They now start to talk about leaving. They now start to talk about maybe we will actually lose this war. So it's the first time in more than 2 years that I've heard these sort of very grim, harrowing mood changes coming from this area. So that will be one of the biggest questions. How are we as the West going to be able to change that mood again, to make these people believe in themselves and to give them back the motivation they need to fight off the Russians?
And I guess the other thing that we're also seeing, I think, around that story is there was, of course, the sense that you had to, of course, as a Ukrainian male, to pick up arms, of course, to join the fight. And I think and maybe I'm not saying there was a bit of forgiveness, but there was a bit of sort of leniency for Ukrainian men abroad. We're now seeing, of course, that, diplomatic services will be removed. And of course, the headline there is that they would like to see you, getting back across the border, back into Ukraine as quickly as possible.
And there's about 11,000 men, who would be required to do military service in Ukraine who live in Switzerland right now, and that's going to be a big problem for them. I think the pressure is going to mount. They will be under a lot of pressure, under a lot of, the eyes will be on them, and it's tough. It's a tough decision. If you live in a country abroad, if you had to flee your home and you now have faced the decision of whether you should stay in safety with your family or should go back to an active war zone to fight, what will you do? I don't know what I would do.
Let's just maybe focus for a moment, Florian, to bring you in. Of course, this peace summit should be happening mid-June in Bergenstock, here in the heart of Switzerland. How much, of course, PR exercise, that Switzerland, of course, becomes the backdrop for this, bringing together all of these parties, and Switzerland doing it versus Qatar doing it, or Norway, or and maybe some of the let's say the legacy diplomacy countries, and prospects out of it. I mean, of course, are we going to see peace at the end of it? Probably unlikely, but hopes.
People just don't stay long enough. It's just unsustainable tourism.
Exactly, you can't sort out things in one day, can you? In Bergenstock,
I know. I think. As I see this at the moment, it's really kind of the attempt of Switzerland and the foreign ministry in Switzerland to kind of be placed on that map again. What you see in the conflict in Gaza is that Switzerland plays no role whatsoever in providing a constructive solution. In Ukraine, historically, Switzerland and their diplomatic relationships were very important in brokering deals. But it has kind of faded a bit with Russia's kind of quite open statement that Switzerland has picked a side, with the Chinese unwillingness to really speak to the Swiss. So I think this is really an effort to kind of place Switzerland as, this kind of table to negotiate again. I think nobody expects, any concrete results. I think the most concrete results we could expect perhaps is a bit of mounting pressure in Switzerland to, support Ukraine substantially, because there were a couple of pieces now leading up to that summit that again kind of outlined how little in terms of financial resources Switzerland is providing to Ukraine, also compared to its GDP or compared to its to the size of its economy. So I think that's kind of like in immediate terms what could happen politically in Switzerland. In the broader sense, I do not expect, much ground gained diplomatically. But I mean, why not start or kick off the process? I'm a bit torn whether this is really substantive or whether it's mainly a PR exercise of placing Switzerland in this negotiation.
Samuel, quickly from you.
I don't think it will change much. There's a big question if Mr. Biden, the US president, is even going to come or not. That's an unclear thing right now. The Chinese basically said that they will not come. If they will send out someone, then it's not going to be a high-up person. Xi Jinping, who just got a visitor from Russia, Vladimir Putin, basically made clear that they are on Russia's side. So I would say it's not much more than a nice little PR exercise at the very nice center of Switzerland.
Well, let's talk about things PR related and otherwise, and head to Cannes via London, in fact, because our correspondent and regular film critic, Karen Krizanovich, just got back from Cannes. I guess you're somewhat fresh from Nice Airport, I hope, at least.
Fresh. That's a lovely word, yes. Actually, everything was great when I came from Nice. A little bit of a delay because apparently there were some storms. Who knew? But trying to get back to West 1 here is... they seem to have shut all the roads. So anyway, it's fine.
So tell us, this was edition 77.
Yes.
What were the key headlines? And I guess, of course, all listeners are wondering, what do we need to be looking out for to watch, and maybe what should be avoided?
Well, gosh, there's a lot to be avoided, but there's also a lot to watch. And it's really strange because this year seemed a lot quieter, a lot less bustle. The first few days were rainy, so people were sort of, we don't really feel like we're at the festival. But it opened with Le Deuxième Acte by Quentin Dupuis. So I can't say I should wake up first. Maybe I'll say it in English, the second act. There you go, which was funny and meta and weird and wild. But there's so many really great things that I think everybody should go see Megalopolis so they can have an opinion, which is the Francis Ford Coppola. He spent 120 million of his own vineyard money on this extravaganza. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. That's what people are saying. It's not very helpful to people who haven't seen it, but it's like Adam Driver is in another movie, but it's great fun, and it'll just, your jaw will be on the floor.
And just quickly, a very, very brief summary. What's Mr. Coppola up to? What's it about?
It's about Adam Driver, who is a scientist who comes up with a new metal, and he wants to change the world. That's basically it. Yes.
And is this set? I imagine this is the near future.
This is New York, but a Baroque kind of New York. It's like a mixture of Caligula, Dynasty, and Succession, all in one, with lots of gold.
Well, everyone could say that. Well, maybe without the gold, but maybe just with a lot of weed. But that could be the New York of today, potentially. Okay, so aside from that, what else?
Diamant Brut by first film director Agatha Reidinger. It's her first film, and it's astonishing. It's a story of a young rural girl in France who wants to be a reality star, and everything she goes through. And her social media dealings and how she feels about herself. And it's just compelling. The central performance was absolutely stunning. And I know you're going to be interested in the Paul Schrader called Oh Canada. I know you will be.
Okay, and just tell me
Go
why.
On. Because it's got Richard Gere and Uma Thurman and also
all my favorites.
All your favorites.
And those famous
Paul Schrader.
Canadians as well.
Yes, and it's about Americans. One American who left his family to live in Canada and became a famous filmmaker.
Okay.
And it's so that's another one that you might want to look at.
It's not one of these stories of all of these Americans we hear about who are going to flee to Vancouver and Toronto because of yet another Trump administration.
Oh,
no.
Well, I think it's echoing that.
It could be. Okay, good. The Girl with the Needle. That just sounds good to me. Whoa. But is it good?
You've got great taste. It's black and white. It's by Magnus
there
von
you
Horn.
Go.
It's based on actually written by a friend of mine's friend, which is nice. Discussed that at lunch. This is a if you watch the trailer, you're going to think, no, I don't want to see this. But the trailer doesn't really say that much. So it's the story of a woman it's just right around the turn of World War I, and she loses her husband and loses her job, and she ends up with this woman who takes in babies, unwanted children. And it's a compelling story based on a true story. And it's shocking, it's beautiful, it's beautifully done. And it says also there's a bit about her husband. I'm not going to say anything, but that's also very important about what happened to men in World War I.
There's something about the Girl With sort of franchise because it's true, is it? Don't you think? It's like you're going to get set up for, something girl. We have had a girl with a pearl earring. We've had tattoos. We've had all kinds of
Girl
things.
With the dragon. Yeah, that's true. But the performances are wonderful, and it's pacey. I saw it late at night. I was really tired, and I thought, wow, I'm enjoying this. I mean, enjoying is the right word. I'm not sure it is, but.
Tell me what the Apprentice.
Now I left before that started. That's going to be screening tonight. It's one of these things where you really have to stay 2 weeks to get everything.
Right.
But this is quite important. This is Abbasi attempting the Donald Trump story with Sebastian Stan, who won the Golden Bear he won an award in Berlin for his performance in A Different Man. So the guy can act, and everybody wants to see this. This is a really hot ticket.
And just coming back to Kevin Costner.
Yes, can't get that ticket either.
Right.
The problem is because I'm accredited for radio, I don't get as many tickets. If it was print,
are you serious?
I am serious.
Talk about discrimination.
If you let me be a print journalist, Tyler, no. If
Go
I was
talk
a
to
print
Andrew
journalist,
if he's near the studio. But go on.
Okay, what do I have to buy him? No, it's fine. But because I'm radio, they're kind of like a no. So anyway, it doesn't matter. Horizon is one of 3 films that Kevin Costner is doing. And it's, again, we think it's probably going to be Yellowstone, but we're all excited because really this year has been the year of the big American stars. We've had Meryl Streep, Kevin Costner. It's one of those things that Cannes does to kind of hook eyes, from the English-speaking world. And this is just going to be very, very exciting. But they've only got 2 screenings of it. So
Okay.
it's going to be bedlam. It's going to be like, a Bosch painting. Terrible.
But I mean, of course, having all of, and we know the French, they want to sort of sometimes trash American stars, but at the same time, of course, they want to pull them and they want them on the red carpet as well.
Yes.
But are these also sort of a little bit like comeback tours as well? Because Meryl Streep has like another house to renovate or she's bought, and
The pool needs to be reshaped. Okay, I've got to tell you about this one. Okay, Jacques Audiard, right? Emilia Perez. You're going to think this is really weird. This is Zoe Saldana, who knew her first language is Spanish. I didn't. Singing about the Mexican cartel boss brings her in and says, I want you to hide my children. I'm going to give you 2 million, maybe it's billion, there's an extra zero in there, to save me, and I want to have a sex change. And you think, and this is a musical. Okay. So you think Baz Luhrmann times 10. And it's spectacular.
Okay. So
Yes.
I think we've got a list. Let's get that in print so we can get you better accreditation next year.
you.
Karen Krizanovich in London for us. Thanks very much for that. Sammy Schumacher, very nice seeing you. We look forward to hearing about maybe more things from the borders of Ticino in Italy. Also Ukraine as well. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Florian, wonderful having you back as well.
Pleasure.
Are you going to be back over the summer?
We have to do an extra segment on the Georgia story.
Yes, we should as well. Also, thanks to Emma Nelson, Andrew Tuck back in London. Also, Karen Krizanovich and also Andrew Beatty down in Australia. Our producers today, Mariella Bevan and Emma Nelson. Studio manager in Zurich, Linus Vivian. And Mariella looked after the sound for us back in London. I'm Tyler Brûlé. Back next week, but from Tokyo. Goodbye.